Welcome to 101. I'm Greg Bassett, your host from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. And today we've got someone here in the studio who I've long admired, but I do not know, so we're going to get to know her together. Dr. Judith Stribling. Welcome, Doctor.
Nice to be here.
Well, you are in the news this week because the Wicomico Creek Watchers are out with their report.
That's right.
You go around, you survey different spots in our river, and let us know how we're doing with water quality. What's the report say this year?
Well, the report is a little bit discouraging, I guess you might say. We have seen in 2015 a decrease in the water quality in some areas. Generally speaking, nitrogen has been improving in the ponds around Salisbury, which is a really good sign that maybe people are managing their fertilizers better and things of that sort. Pet waste maybe too. But overall in the river, nitrogen was worse in most places. Phosphorus was considerably worse in the upper river especially. So we have indicators that nutrient levels had increased throughout the system, probably very likely due to increased rainfall in 2015.
Right.
We also measure chlorophyll and water clarity, and both of those were mixed as well. So generally chlorophyll actually did improve somewhat, and we see that happen when there's more runoff. It seems to flush the algae out of the system,
Right.
send them down into the bay where they can, do their thing. But,
Right.
but at any rate, the river is, still exhibiting the effects of stormwater runoff particularly. The most concerning part of our report, I think, is for the bacteria levels, which were in the unhealthy range in 6 out of the 8 sites that we measure for annual averages, and were that was been very poor, and then moderately poor in the other 2. So we had no swimmable sites in the areas that we measure.
Now, when you measure, do you do it like all on the same day? Because I know just looking at the river, some days the river looks great and some days it doesn't.
Sure.
So is it all a matter of when you measure, or?
Well, to a degree, which is why we measure every 2 weeks. So
Okay.
we are talking about an annual
So
average.
it's not just
that
you show up one day.
Right.
Okay.
It's averaged from mid-March to early November.
Right.
And we're out there every 2 weeks. When we sample, the volunteers sample exactly within that a one-day window, generally within a few hours of each other. They put their samples on ice. They deliver them to a transfer station at George Miles and Buer, and then those are delivered to my laboratory at Salisbury University.
Wow.
And my volunteer students analyze them, and we have some samples sent to Horn Point Laboratory as well.
Right. Now, growing up with this, we've all learned the different things that we need to be on watch for. Nitrogen was the first one that I was taught about, like in
Right.
9th grade biology.
Right.
Why is nitrogen a bad thing in our water?
Well, nitrogen and phosphorus both are a problem, and it depends really on where you are. Generally in freshwater, phosphorus can be more of a problem than nitrogen. In marine systems, nitrogen tends to be and open bay areas, for example, nitrogen tends to be more of a problem. They aren't a direct harm to human health whatsoever, but those high levels produce algal blooms. They are fertilizer for the bay
Right.
and river algae. And when those algae flourish, that's not a bad thing either. It's when they die. So you get blooms are like a boom and bust cycle in the stock market or something. They crash, they die. As they decompose, their decomposition sucks oxygen out of the water and creates dead zones. So this is indicative of a problem that's really a major problem in the main stem of the bay, in the deeper waters where we have fish and crabs being limited in where they can go because of low oxygen levels.
Right. And I didn't know it was the decaying part. I thought
It's
just
the decay.
their living part, that they took the
Right.
oxygen out by living.
Now there can be some problems if you have excessive levels of nutrients, which we really don't have in the Wicomico River. I need to emphasize that we're not above the real serious levels for nitrogen and phosphorus. We're in the moderate range. So it's problematic for nutrients, but it's not as bad as some areas.
Right.
in those areas where it's really high, you can get harmful algal blooms. And we see these throughout the bay at different times, and it has happened, you know, more locally as well. Harmful algal blooms are blooms of unusual species that tend to thrive in very high nutrient conditions that can cause human health risks and problems with, you know, paralytic shellfish poison and things like that. So
Right.
that is sometimes the link. Generally, nitrogen phosphorus, the bad guy is the decomposition of those algae.
Right. And when we hear about things like red tide, is that
That's
related
a very
to that?
good,
Okay.
gymnodidium, that's a very good example. Mhm.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
Now, phosphorus, of course, has been traced to poultry, I guess. Generally, it seems to be associated.
To
Why
some
is
degree.
phosphorus an issue?
Why is it
Why is it a problem?
a problem?
Yeah.
Well, again, it's just another nutrient.
It's another nutrient.
Right,
Okay.
and as I said, generally speaking, there's enough nitrogen in freshwater areas like the upper Nanticoke, but the limiting nutrient can be phosphorus. So if you add more phosphorus, you see more algal blooms. I think in our upper Nanticoke, it's hard to say which one really. They're both a problem.
Right. Now, I don't remember reading about chlorophyll before. Is that a new measurement?
Well, it's just a measurement of the algal abundance, the
Okay.
abundance of those algae, those phytoplankton in the water.
Okay.
And so that tells you whether you can expect some problems with their decomposition later on.
Right. And then, of course, fecal bacteria, which is the nasty stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And where does that mostly come from for it to
Well,
be?
that's a very good question. And folks that are in the bacterial source tracking lab at SU are actually looking into that question directly, trying to trace those bacteria to their source, whether it's human, dog, cat, goose, horse, whatever. So we are not sure. We don't know in our measurements. All we know is we have these bacteria. We don't know exactly where they came from. One of the things I'm really interested in doing, for example, is looking at our pond systems where we know we have some potential sources in some areas, perhaps, of leaking septic tanks and things like that, so, or failing septic tanks, that could be a direct source for this.
Right. Now, people love to blame the city of Salisbury and their sewer plant for everything that's wrong in the Wicomico River. Is that true anymore, or is that
The wastewater treatment plant actually discharges 0 bacteria levels because they treat it with you know, antibiotics or with chlorine right now. And so that we had a couple years ago when we had very little rainfall and we had pristine waters right around the sewage treatment outfall because it was essentially depleting the waters of bacteria.
Right.
You know, in some cases with all of bacteria aren't harmful. In some cases that may shift the balance of those communities, and there's some questions about that. But no, the wastewater treatment plant is a mixed bag. Clearly there's a signal for phosphorus around it right now, and its nitrogen levels too are not where they're targeted to be. So I'm excited to see what happens when that plant gets finally working the way it was designed to be, you know, what effect that will have, because it's a major input to the system.
One thing as a reporter I've noticed for years is that every group points fingers at the other group.
Right.
So people point fingers at the residential homeowners putting the Scott's chemical on their front lawn. People will point to the poultry farmers. They'll point to the other farmers. Everyone loves to point to the Conowingo Dam for all the problems, you know, in the Chesapeake Bay.
Which has no influence on the Wicomico whatsoever.
Well, it's still, but everyone has a different sort of a bad guy in this situation. Is it everybody? Is it if you could just pick one to go after? Who is causing the most trouble?
Well, the Creek Watchers' mission is to provide data.
Right.
Right. And we don't point fingers. We don't try to assess. I mean, we do try to assess sources.
Sure.
But I think what our objective is to provide information to folks who have the ability to make changes, and everyone has the ability to make changes, and changes are being made. And I think one of the things that our data show that I think is really important is the effect of rainfall. So if you look at wet years versus dry years, you see good water quality in dry years, poor water quality in wet years. It almost goes without saying. And therefore, we're thinking that the best thing we can do, whatever the sources of these nutrients are, we need to control their delivery. And we can control their delivery by controlling stormwater runoff to a great degree. Now, of course, there's other sources through groundwater and so on. But we know that limiting impervious surface, paving and roofs and all those things have a huge influence. And I know why the city of Salisbury has recently adopted a stormwater utility. Wicomico County is implementing some stormwater management measures under its WIPs, watershed supplementation plans. So these are great measures, and I think this is what the citizens of the region need to get behind.
Right. If you look at it even from 20 years ago, all the new construction has stormwater management.
Right.
And it's so impressive, it really is.
It is amazing.
The engineering that goes into this, and like when you look at it, you're so proud of it.
Right. It's excellent, and we see this in a lot of our new construction. The state mandated new guidelines for
Right.
stormwater. You know, even new poultry houses have to have this, so it's going to make a difference, I think. But at the individual level, you know, citizens can certainly install rain gardens. They can put rain barrels in their downspouts that limit those big pulses of water. It's that big pulse when you get a heavy rain that is
Right.
really the biggest problem,
Right.
especially for that, you know, pet waste getting shunted right into the river.
Right. Now, growing up on the farm, my grandfather used to root for those big storms because it would flush out the creeks. And he felt like his crabbing was always better because
Probably
the water
was.
clarity would improve a little bit right after the big storm. But that's not really the case.
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, as I said, we saw lower chlorophyll levels last year, probably because of a bit of that flushing effect in the Wicomico River. The problem is it's a sending the problem downstream kind of story, because you have higher flows, which mean that those nutrients are simply being delivered more directly to the central part of the bay, where they can do even more damage.
Right. Now, septic tanks get a lot of discussion. I'm always amazed that by people who move here who have never heard of a septic tank before. They'll buy a house, they'll move in,
Sure.
and they're like, where's my garbage disposal? And they don't even realize that they're not on a municipal system.
No.
I hear that all the time. How important is migrating away from septic tanks and getting on a central sewer system to fighting pollution?
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for being able to manage wastewater in a centralized way. There are a lot of implications of that as far as, you know, distributing it out throughout the county in terms of promoting more sprawl development and things of that sort. So there's a bit of a balancing act. The most important thing, I think, in the short term is that people make sure that they pump out their septic tanks on a very short-term basis. You know, if you can keep that material, essentially what you're doing is you're making your septic tank a short-term storage unit for the wastewater treatment plant, because that material then gets delivered to the wastewater treatment plant where it gets treated. So the nitrogen gets removed, in theory. You know, eventually
Right.
that's going to happen, and the phosphorus gets settled out. Everything, the nutrients are addressed there. Your septic tank really is a holding tank, and the shorter the time you leave material in there, the better for its functioning and for the water quality.
Yeah, I don't think there's a mindset to do anything with it until there's a problem.
Exactly.
You just bury it in
Yeah.
the yard. You
Oh
don't think about it
gosh,
for
I
10
have
years.
bubbles coming up in my lawn. I better pump
Right.
that thing out. No, it's not a good way to proceed.
Right.
Actually, I think there are some recommendations now of 2 to 3 year time frames for those. So, you know, it's a short-term window that you have, really. And I know it's expensive, but if you haven't had your septic tank pumped out in 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years,
Right.
do it.
Someone tried to tell me one time, and I didn't believe them when they said it. It was a pro-environmental person. We're all pro-environmental people, but this person was really radical about it. Said that if every house on Riverside Drive on both sides of the river were connected to a central sewer, the river would be perfect. Is that true, or is that an exaggeration, or it would be better?
It would certainly make a difference, you know, because a properly designed septic tank does deliver nutrients to the environment. It doesn't capture them. It doesn't really hold on to them.
Right.
It stores some in the sludge in the bottom, but the nitrogen particularly is going to be dissolved in the water that goes out into the drain field and into the groundwater and into the river.
Right.
So that will make a big difference to eliminate that in high density areas. Absolutely.
Right. In reviewing the report, it was interesting. You would think that the most polluted water's got to be right there by Salisbury, and the cleanest water is out by Whitehaven. But not exactly
Not
not
always,
that
right.
case at all,
I
really.
know. And that does point the finger in a way to other land use issues, right?
Right.
So we do have high density poultry farms, we do have high density agricultural nutrient applications. Lots of measures have been taken to help rein that in. I know that when I first moved to Delmarva in the 70s, chickens were disposed of on the land in the open.
Absolutely.
Manure was disposed of whenever it was abundant.
Yeah.
Management has improved dramatically, and I think we're going to see the effects of that over time very greatly. However, we do have to acknowledge that, we have intensive farming, we have intensive agriculture that demands a lot of nutrients. It is a high nutrient practice. And so that is something that has to be taken into consideration when we're looking at how do we manage our loading to the river. We're manipulating things in a way that, makes a single farm's practices better. How does that transfer out? And the same thing is true for development. The more people you add, there's not a magic bullet for reducing everybody's loading so much that you can continue to grow infinitely.
Right. There's going to be an end point at some point.
There is an end point.
Right. Now, speaking of that, I don't mean to insult at all, but you are regarded, among my colleagues at least, as a reasonable voice when it comes to the environment. We deal with so many radical people on the environment. The idea where
Just because I'm older.
well, I've tried to write editorials in the past where I seek a balance between what man and nature need, and enviros will call me and go, "There's no balance. Environment always wins. Man has to adapt to the environment. There is no compromise on these issues," and I understand that. I get all that. But you're someone who's known as a really thoughtful voice on this, where you try to see things from both points of view. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Is that true?
I look at the dialogue as a dialogue, not a battle. I have had exceptional experience over the years with people who I disagree with on many things by just looking into why they are thinking the way they do. My own personal views haven't changed dramatically. I think my style has changed more than that. I do tend to be, at heart, someone who believes that we are dangerously close to the tipping point with respect to our abuse of the environment. I really am.
Right.
And I'm not going to tie myself to a tree in front of a logging
right.
operation, but I think that, there's far too little regard for what we all depend on. Our green infrastructure is called that for a reason. It is infrastructure. It underpins everything that we do.
Right.
And yeah, I can get quite passionate about it.
Right. And my own evolution on it was I was always dismissive of it, and then I learned more about it, and I understood, and then I got it, and now I walk around impressed at how far we've come. So I look at the stormwater drainage systems, and I'm like, wow, we're getting it done. We're doing it here. And I look at the work with the Waverly Drive thing, just the drainage into that. No one ever thought about where that water went in the Pinehurst neighborhood and the sewers. Right. But now people think about that stuff. So I feel like there's been great progress. Am I kind of...
No, absolutely.
Okay.
We're all better educated about it.
We have to keep
we have a
going.
Requirement in our schools for some environmental education. Right. My students come in with a lot more commitment to things like that. And I think that's encouraging. I think it's just that the rate of population growth, the rate of demand on resources is growing faster than our efforts to offset that. So at some point, just with global warming, we have to recognize that, it is a crisis.
Right.
And it's not something that we can sit back and pat ourselves on the back about. We really aren't doing enough yet.
Right. I watched the coastal bays closely down in Worcester County, and it used to be 20, 30 boats on a Saturday would be in the bay there. Now there must be 2,000 boats. You could walk across the bay by walking on people's boats. There's so much boat traffic, and there's so much use of that system. Yeah.
So if every one of those is now a 4-stroke instead of a 2-stroke,
right.
You still have the pollution of that many times more motors,
right.
for example. Yeah.
It's just amazing to me how many people are using our natural resources,
right.
which is good, but at the same time, it's also a detriment.
It's not necessarily sustainable.
One of your talents is that you're a great writer, and you've always been a great letter writer. When I was at the Daily Times, loved getting the Judith Stribling letters. And you wrote a letter recently about the whole poultry house dilemma that's going on that struck a reasonable tone. It was so reasonable, in fact, that Bob Culver used it. He actually read it at a forum where there were 500 people.
Right.
And it's sort of like his attitude on this was similar to yours, so he kind of wore that as a badge of honor, like even Judith Stribling supports what I'm up to here. Do you want to talk about this whole thing with the CAFOs and the in the poultry?
Well, again, that's one of those issues where there are people that I care deeply about on both sides, And I have very, very good friends. One of my very best friends is a poultry farmer who lives, you know, a life, their livelihood depends upon this chicken house. They work really hard, day and night, and they have made incredible strides, as you said, you know. And I think that my biggest concern with this CAFO issue is the paradigm shift that it represents in terms of a transition from an individual farmer who is diversified by adding poultry to his income stream to allow him to or her to manage you know, a farm efficiently and productively, to a very high density centralized system of, you know, many, many, many poultry houses in one place. That's so different. I think Wicomico County and the Eastern Shore as a whole have adjusted and assimilated that first model pretty well, you know, with, you know, ongoing regulation of nutrients. Yeah, it's been, but suddenly we have this other idea, this other concept, this other model thrown in the mix.
Right.
That's so different that all of us need to step back and take a look at it. And, and I think, you know, I would suggest that it's time to really get out in front of that. It's almost too late because many of those have been approved already.
Right.
But I do think it's something that we can't afford to ignore.
Right.
And just for the sake of these individual poultry farmers, is it going to be worth it for a feed truck to go all the way to Nanticoke to supply 2 houses, you know, when they can supply 15 houses right near Salisbury?
Right.
What's that going to do to property values in Salisbury? All of these are very valid issues. And that's what I tried, Gene Williams and I wrote that letter together. We tried to articulate that in the letter, that, you know, there are many things that have to be addressed here. When we first wrote the letter, it was just a series of questions, you know.
Right.
And I think that's where I am. I'm not on somebody's side here. I'm saying we need to look at this as a community.
Right.
And remember that we are a community.
Well,
that was my
I
main
loved it, and I think it's what makes you different to a degree, because that issue, if it's just about how many nutrients end up in the water, you could write about that, but you talked about the cultural aspects and the economies of scale, what it's going to do to businesses, just the changing face of who we are, which is not what I would have thought would be the argument. And of course, when this first came up, I was like, well, I'm against that. I don't want big factory farms. But then through those forums, and the more I learned about it, I was like, wait a minute, this might be, for the environment, a better way to go.
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I think a lot depends on how it's regulated, how it's zoned. You know, our zoning laws are not ready for this.
Right.
Our communities are not ready for this. So we really need to slow down.
Right. And that's what the county tried to do, make a zoning issue versus an environmental issue. I think the environmental point was kind of proven. I remember my cousin Bob Bassett, the family farm down in Ironshire, he was complaining to me one day that he had attended a state training thing on how to manage poultry manure. He's like, I've been a chicken farmer for 40 years. I know how to manage poultry manure. And I'm like, no, you don't. That's why the creeks are polluted, because you don't know how to manage. They're going to show you how to do this, you know. So the farmers don't always get it.
Well, I think more and more they do. More and more they do. And my friend, for example, he trucks all of his poultry manure away from his, he doesn't have enough people to use it where he is, so it all leaves the area.
Right.
And where it goes, that's another question, right? But I think that more and more the farmers understand, and they're being required to change their approach.
Right.
Yeah.
Tell me more about the Creek Watchers. Who are they? Who was your group?
Well, we have this fabulous group of volunteers who live up and down the river, and they sample every other week, starting in March and going into November on Tuesdays. And they collect data, environmental data, wind speed, water temperature, the clarity of the water. They measure themselves, and then they sample the water for the nutrient samples, nutrient chlorophyll, pH. We measure salinity, and then they also, at 8 selected sites, now we have 23 sites that are monitored throughout that time. During the recreational season, from late May to October, we also sample 8 sites for bacteria analysis. And so those samples are evaluated in the Bacterial Source Tracking Lab at SU. These volunteers are people who live along the river. So we have Pete Bosick, who is with George Miles and Beer, who lives right on the river, and he samples as as all of our volunteers do, from a readily accessible point right along the river or one of the ponds, or Wicomico Creek is another site another system that we measure.
Right. I saw the report, Wicomico Creek did pretty well.
In some ways it does.
Yeah.
We only have 3 sites there, so it's a little less
Okay.
of a robust data set, but yeah, it's a different system. It's obviously much more agricultural.
Right.
Has some beautiful marshes, and marshes are great at removing
That
nutrients.
would make sense, okay.
So, yeah, it does help. So in addition to those citizen volunteers who collect our samples and collect data for us each week, we also have a group of student volunteers, as I mentioned before, who do the analysis in the laboratory at SU.
Now, if I'm watching you on TV and I want to get involved in this, how do I become a creek watcher?
Wonderful, yes. Well, if you go to the Salisbury University website, we actually have a website, a Creek Watcher website there.
Okay.
You can also call me at the university, and I can direct you to our volunteer coordinator, who will set you up, and we always need help. So definitely, one of our sites that we're really looking for someone to help out with is way down in Whitehaven. So, you know, some of these people do a lot to contribute to this, from, you know, driving all the way from Mount Vernon to Salisbury every
Right.
other week to deliver their samples. So it's a very quick process in terms of just collecting the data and collecting the sample. It's just remembering to do it, being diligent about sample handling, and then making sure the sample gets to its delivery point on time. But yes.
And your report is on the website?
It is, yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
It's a beautiful PDF. It's a great report. It's
Right.
great to read. It's very educational. It's written so that people like I can understand what's going on.
We had a new designer help us
Okay.
this year, and I'm really proud of I think it's much more readable and user-friendly, and I hope people will appreciate it. On the website, we have some more information about our sampling program, and we're planning to actually upload more detailed data pretty soon too. So.
What's the prognosis? Where are we headed on all this? Are things going to get better?
Well, as I said, I think we are looking at the effects of a lot of things. The long-term management of poultry manure, it's going to take a while for that to trickle down, literally, in terms of what we
Right.
see in terms of runoff and especially groundwater flows. The effect of finally getting the wastewater treatment plant online, the effect of all these stormwater management practices that are getting ready to be implemented. So how can it not get better? Unless we, you know, continue to just add so many more people and so many more recreational boating activities and so many more abuses of the land, that we overwhelm that. These are all things we have to keep in mind. We need to recognize every aspect of what we do has an influence on the river. And wouldn't it be awesome if we could actually, you know, go back to the days
Swim
when
again.
people swam up in there?
It would be great to water ski in the Wicomico River again.
Yeah, and that was common. Bass fishing, that was the best bass fishing river in the bay.
Right.
People would come from all the way from the western shore to fish in the Wicomico River, and it's not a pretty picture now.
Right. She's Dr. Judith Stribling. She's helping us have clean water and keeping an eye on things that are going out there in the environment. We really appreciate her time today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
I'm Greg Bassett from the Salisbury Independent Newspaper. Another edition of 101 right here on PAC 14.
First Shore Federal is proud to support PAC 14 and one-on-one. We'd encourage every business to support PAC 14 and pick a program and support it, and let's make a difference.